Welcome all of you. Today we will be starting with the new unit, that is environmental clearance. Earlier we studied about environmental laws, some acts and the court or judiciary thing associated with the environmental matters, that is NGT, National Green Tribunal. Continuing with that, let us look at what is environmental clearance in today's class. What is the need for environmental clearance? Who needs to apply to get this clearance? What is the process for that environmental clearance? And when it comes to getting clearance, obviously it has to come from some government authority. And who would be applying for it? So, someone who wish to set up a new project or someone who wish to expand or modify an existing company or a plant. So, there are different categories of projects, and EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. This is the thing which comes like simultaneously along with environmental clearance, because without EIA report, without having the assessment of environmental impacts of the proposed activity, you cannot apply for environmental clearance. But about EIA, we will be studying about EIA and EIA methods in detail in the coming lectures, but today we will be focusing mainly on environmental clearance. Also, since MOEFCC, that is the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, it is a nodal ministry for all environment, forest and climate change related matters. What is its role, what is the history, how it came into effect, that we will be studying in today's class. So, environmental clearance, what is it? It is a mandatory regulatory process to assess the likely environmental impacts of a proposed development project. So, I have underlined the words likely environmental effects and the proposed project. So, clearance has to be obtained before some project or activity is actually implemented. So, it is like a permission, a regulatory permission that you are good to go and set up a new project. Also, before setting up any project, we do not know what are the actual environmental impacts. So, the only thing we can do is predict it or evaluate or assess the likely environmental impacts. And how do we do that? If we know about a project, all the activities involved in the project, the site, the location, where that project is going to be implemented. So, it gives us some idea, some background how and which components of the environment are going to be affected by which of the activities of the project. So, that is how we list down or assess the likely environmental impacts. And what is the purpose of clearance? It ensures that the project plan or the design, when I say plan or design, again it is the same thing, planning and designing stage of the project before actually starting the construction phase or installation phase. So, it ensures that the project plan or design includes adequate mitigation measures to prevent, reduce or offset negative impacts on the environment. Whenever any project is to be set up, obviously the prior motive would be the economic one, the profit one, but considering today's world which is very much concerned about global warming, climate change, environment. So, project proposers try to choose a site or try to make choice of resources or the processes which may have least impact on the environment. But then again we need to assess what would be the impacts, and if there are any impacts, can they be prevented, reduced or like modified. So, for that there should be a strategy, there should be a measures, and those measures should be included in the application for obtaining an environmental clearance. So, once we do all those things and apply for environmental clearance, it acts as a green signal granted by a competent authority. Competent authority can be a state level or at national level, depending on the size or magnitude of the project or the ecological zone in which that particular project is going to be implemented. So, basically environment clearance, it acts as a preventive mechanism rather than a curative one. So, it tries to prevent environmental degradation from any activity before it happens. So, basically it is based on the likely environmental impacts for the proposed activity and likely mitigation measures that would be taken to reduce those environmental impacts. So, in that sense, this green signal, this environmental clearance, it promotes a sort of preventive mechanism and not a curative one. So, if you look at the history, again it is related to how environmental impact assessment notifications started coming into picture, EIA notification, and then that shaped the process of obtaining environmental clearance in India. So, the first EIA notification came on 27 January 1994, and this notification, it made the environmental clearance mandatory for 29 different categories of projects. So, it includes the border, the airport, dams, river valley, the huge thermal power plants, so like beaches. So, all those projects were included in this category, and all these projects, they need to have mandatory environmental clearance, and this clearance was granted by the central government mainly through the Ministry of Environment and Forest, because it was before 2014. That time MOEFCC was MOEF only. This notification, it underwent several amendments and changes over all these years, but we will look at the major amendments which happened during its course of journey. So, in 2002, the introduction of concept of public hearing was made in the EIA process or environmental clearance process. So, before that, public hearing was not a inherent component of that notification, but then after 2022, the public hearing became a mandatory component. Ultimately, it was the public or the community surrounding living nearby that project area who would be affected to the maximum extent. So, it is important to have their views, their understanding about the project. In 2006, there was a revised EIA notification, a new draft you can say, which replaced 1994 notification, and it was this notification which started the categorizing of projects at state level or at central level. So, category A projects were dealt by ministry at central level, category B projects were dealt with state level authorities. In 2020 recently, there was a EIA draft notification, and it was brought by the government by proposing major reforms to make the environmental clearance process faster, because till 2020 the typical environmental clearance process for an average project used to take almost 1 year, sometimes more than 1 year. And since most of the formalities were paper based, hard copy based, it was difficult to keep track of all the documents and share it with all the stakeholders involved in that environmental clearance process. So, to make EIA process faster and more digital, there were several reforms proposed, but in that course, what happened was the public participation got affected. Many projects like say renewable energy projects, they were exempted from EIA, or the projects related to defense or border areas, they were exempted from EIA or public participation. So, there were several changes which were not liked by the public, and hence that draft was not finalized even today, but several amendments have been made in the 2006 notification, which has altogether changed its entire structure. In 2024 recently, there was updated guidelines, and the EIA notification was integrated with national single window system, like having a digital portal named as Parivesh. We will see into the subsequent slides. So, all these things related to environmental clearance were brought on a single portal. So, and it will be easy for all the stakeholders to observe and give comments or have an update on the application. It will be easy for project proposer to check update or status on their application for environmental clearance. So, based on 2006 notification of EIA, the categorization of projects was category A, the national level appraisal, category B needed state level appraisal, and in category B there were two types of projects, one which mandatory requires EIA and one which do not require EIA. For category A, all the projects needed EIA. What kind of projects come into this picture, because these categories we will be looking at it in more detail when we study about EIA, but right now I am just giving you a glimpse that there are two types of categories of projects, A and B, national level, state level. In state level there are two types, one which needs EIA, one which do not need EIA. So, if you look at some examples like say mining, greater than 50 hectares of mining this area, they will be under category A, and less than that or greater than 1 hectare, it will be in category B. Thermal power plants greater than 500 megawatt falls in category A, whereas the smaller ones would come under category B. Similarly, cement plants greater than 1 million ton per year, it is a category A, and less than 1 million is a category B. And metallurgical industry, the primary ones, primary metallurgical industry means the extraction of mines and ores, extraction of metals from ores. So, they are highly energy intensive, they have huge environmental impact spread across huge land area. So, they are category A projects, but secondary metallurgical industries, for example, reusing and recycling of metals, manufacturing of alloys from metals. So, those kind of secondary industries in metallurgy, they come under category B. Then there are hydropower plants, river valley projects, they would typically come under category A. If it is like say small hydropower project like less than 25 megawatt, they may come under category B. Each environmental clearance, it has a validity. Mining projects typically have 30 years, river valley 10 years, other projects will come with a 5-year validity of environmental clearance. So, let us look at a general environmental clearance process, like what are all the steps involved, right from submission of application form to like the TOR or terms of reference are made, and then who assess it, who evaluates it, at what point public is brought in, and whether it is obtained, granted or rejected. So, the first step is submission of application to ministry, that is form 1, and that involves verification of all documents and a meeting with the representatives of MOEF, so that they approve the draft TOR. So, this TOR is a terms of reference which sets the guidelines and scope of work, like what would be the scope of work, what would be the processes involved, what would be the likely impacts, all those things would be included in the terms of reference. So, once these documents and TOR are prepared, the draft TOR is checked whether it is okay and complete. Based on that, it will be like the project proposer will be asked to draft EIA report preparation, and if the TOR itself is not ready and complete, additional TOR may be prescribed by the ministry, and then the project proposer can start preparing the EIA report. So, TOR comes before the EIA report. Okay. So, first there is form 1, that is application form, then verification of documents and draft TOR approval. If that TOR is okay, you go and start preparing EIA report. If it is not okay, additional TOR may be prescribed. So, TOR is a terms of reference. EAC is the expert appraisal committee at the central level of Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change. So, after that draft EIA report is prepared, that is sent to the public hearing, but depending on the project, whether it can be exempted from public hearing or it needs public hearing. So, suppose if it does not need public hearing, it can go to MOEF directly, and then it can go for EAC meeting. EAC is expert appraisal committee. If it is not exempted from public hearing, it has to go to public. Public is given like 1 month or 45 days to give their inputs on the project, and then the proceedings or the recommendations of public is included in the EIA report, and that revised or complete report is submitted to MOEF. Once that proposal of the project that comes to the EAC meeting, that project is evaluated, and if the project is okay, it will declare that the required information is complete and environment clearance can be granted. But the information which was required is not complete, it may ask the project proposal to send the information again, and at this stage if the project is itself not okay, it will be rejected. So, that is the overall general process for environmental clearance. It starts from form 1 MOEF, then terms of reference, then EIA report, then public hearing, then project appraisal, and then there is a rejection or granting of the environmental clearance. Terms of reference, it is a set of guidelines and scope of work issued by the state or central government authority to the project proponent, and it should define what aspects or what are all the things that could be included in the EIA report. So, it is like a glossary table of contents, but with some information on each topic. So, for example, category A projects, who prepares the terms of reference? It will be the project proponent. They will submit form 1 pre-feasibility report, and it will be reviewed by EAC, but it will be approved by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So, that is for central level or national level projects for bigger projects of category A. Category B1 projects which mandatory requires EIA, B2 projects do not need EIA. So, here also project proponent will submit the same documents and it will be reviewed by the state level expert appraisal committee and it will be approved by state level, that environment impact assessment agency. So, that is about the terms of reference. As I said earlier, in 2020, after 2020, there has been a process of digitalizing the entire environmental clearance thing. So, there is a portal of Indian government called as Parivesh. If you just type Parivesh on Google, it will open this portal for you, and it is on this portal project proponents can apply for different types of clearances, not just environmental clearance. It also has the options for forest clearance, wildlife clearance along with environmental clearance. And once you apply, you can check the status of your application, you can check the recommendations given by the committee, the updates on the proposal. So, that was about the Parivesh dashboard and the proposal. So, to summarize the whole environmental clearance thing, what we saw so far, the nature of environmental clearance, it is preventive, it is regulatory, it is a science based assessment because EIA is a scientific thing. The legal basis is the Environmental Protection Act of 1986 and the EIA notification of 2006, including the amendments made in 2020 and later years. What is the purpose? The purpose of environmental clearance is to ensure the projects are environmentally sustainable. The responsible authorities at national level, there is a ministry, there is a expert appraisal committee, and then at state level, there is a state environment impact assessment agency and state level expert appraisal committee. And the core principle of this environmental clearance is the sustainable development through precautionary assessment. So, as we discussed earlier, the assess likely impacts for a proposed project and not only assess the impacts, but make sure the TOR or the EIA report has the adequate measures to reduce or minimize those impacts. So, that was all about environmental clearance. Second part of today's lecture was MOEFCC, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Let us have a brief overview of this ministry, which is a nodal ministry responsible mainly for planning, promoting, coordinating and overseeing the implementation of environmental and forestry policies and programs. So, anything related to environment, forest, whether it is or any policy of the government or program, it is this ministry which is responsible for planning, promoting, executing and overseeing it. The primary objectives, obviously it will be related to the components of the environment or forestry, mainly flora, fauna, biodiversity, the forest. So, objectives are conserving the nation's flora, fauna, forest and wildfare, preventing and controlling pollution, implementing programs for afforestation and regenerating degraded areas, overseeing India's policies on climate change and ensuring the welfare of animals. So, if you look at all those 5 objectives, it sort of covers all 3 of these things: environment, forest and climate change. So, for climate change, it has a separate primary objective of overseeing India's policies on climate change. So, it is possible that some of these objectives may overlap with some of other ministries, because like let us take example of climate change, Ministry of Power or the ministry related to coal or energy, that will also have influence on these policies related to the climate change. So, it is likely that several ministries may have some objectives which overlap with each other, and that is why there is a need for collaboration between the ministries under the government of India. So, how this ministry was formed, let us look at its history. So, in 1972, there was a Stockholm conference. I think we discussed this earlier also. After this conference, there was a constitution of National Committee on Environmental Planning and Coordination in India, and it was formed under DST, Department of Science and Technology. In 1980, Department of Environment was established, a separate Department of Environment, which became Ministry of Environment and Forest in 1985. In 2006, NEP, that is National Environment Policy, was announced, and in 2014 this ministry was renamed as Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So, I think that is the overview history. I think you should remember so far as MOEFCC is concerned. This website is the portal for the ministry where you can see all the news or guidelines or orders or tenders associated with the ministry. There are so many divisions. I will show the organization structure. So, at the top there is a cabinet minister, then minister of state, then we have a secretary who is of IAS cadre, and the secretary serves as the administrative head of the ministry. And then there are several divisions or wings associated with environment, forest, wildlife and climate change. These four are main divisions. Okay. There are four major divisions: environment, forest, wildlife and climate change, which comes under this ministry. And it is a secretary who works as a link, connecting link between the ministers and these divisions, and ensures that the whole organization or all the policies are implemented properly. These are some key institutions associated with or like working under the umbrella of MOEFCC, like CPCB, SPCBs, then some National Board for Wildlife, Forest Survey of India, Forest Rights Act authorities. There are different surveys and authorities associated with different components of environment and forest. They are the key institutions, and whenever MOEFCC has to formulate any policies or draft any policies, these are the institutions which it approach for ideas, for validation and for implementation support also. That is I think the building for the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and these are some of the news which shows like how it keeps on tracking whether the compliance reports are submitted by the project proposers timely or not. It shows it rejected some clearance for hydro project, citing the landslide risk or Western Ghats damage. So, these projects, whether it is of any category and in different zones, whether they need environmental clearance or not, all those things would be overlooked, would be overseen by MOEFCC. So, we will stop here for today's lecture. So, to summarize, we looked at what is the process of environmental clearance, like the entire flow chart. I think we discussed it. That there are different terminologies included in the environmental clearance, like Form 1, TOR, expert and appraisal committee, and then whether it is then EIA report and environmental clearance accepted or rejected. MOEFCC, we saw like the history, how it came into existence, what are its primary objectives and how it performs its different roles in association with different institutions. So, with that we will close today's lecture. Thank you.